Hello, and welcome to this edition of the SAU Report. I'm Kyle Holleman.
And I'm April Malone.
Today, our guest is Dr. Charles Young, Assistant Professor here at Southern Arkansas University of History, and this is his first semester here. Thank you, Dr. Young, for being with us today.
My pleasure.
My first question to you is, how did you end up coming here to Southern Arkansas University?
You mean, what's a Yankee doing down here? Well, you all needed a professor of U.S. history, and I needed a job, so I accepted the job, and now I'm here.
What brought you to SAU besides the job?
Well, I come from a small town, despite the fact that I've been living in New Jersey for the past dozen years. I come from a small town in Wisconsin. I'm a cheesehead, and my wife is from an even smaller town in Wisconsin, so we've actually been looking for a quieter place to come live, and that was kind of my competitive advantage in getting a job out here. I was willing to go anywhere, whereas a lot of people only want to be in New York or California, but we're happy to come here to Arkansas.
So you had no problem adjusting to Magnolia, Arkansas?
It really hasn't been much of a problem at all. We're fine.
What do you think of the staff here, especially in the history department here at Southern Arkansas University?
The staff is very easygoing but professional. I enjoy them very much. They're committed to the students, and they're supportive of research and intellectual vigor, and I'm happy with it.
Dr. Young, where did you do your undergraduate studies, and what degree did you receive?
Well, I got a BA in journalism from the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and I was in radio and did this and did that for a while. Eventually decided to go into academia, and I got an MA, a master's degree in U.S. history from University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and I did well enough in that program to launch myself into Rutgers, which is in New Brunswick, New Jersey, a very good school. I was very happy to get in there, and I got a PhD in U.S. history from Rutgers.
So what classes are you teaching here at Southern Arkansas University?
3 sections of the first semester of U.S. history and an advanced topics in history course. This semester we're focusing on the Vietnam War, the course that you are in.
Yes.
And you have a paper too.
Yes, I am a student. I have a paper too. Thank you.
Okay, what exactly did you, brought you from journalism to history?
Well, while I was working in radio, over time I got a little bit dissatisfied with what I felt was kind of the shallow soundbite level of radio journalism, and I started wanting something a little meatier that I could dig into more. And I also realized that at the radio station I was at, I was doing a lot of teaching, working with journalism students, and I realized I enjoyed working with the students as much or as more than the journalism, and so I just started gravitating towards the classroom, and I also realized that I liked the idea of having a room full of people that had to listen to me. I wanted a live audience instead of just speaking into a microphone.
What did you take from working with radio and bring it to the classroom?
The biggest thing is clarity of writing, because I was writing every day and I was writing for radio, which is a simpler, clear type of writing, and so that's a point of pride of mine is the clarity of my writing, and even in the rarefied academic circles, I often get comments that my writing is very clear, and that comes from journalism. And also I think just the amount of time that I was running my trap on the radio has made it a bit easier to address a classroom, and I'm fairly comfortable in front of a group.
Dr. Young, some teachers, I should say, tend to shy away from certain topics in history. Should controversial topics be taught in the classroom?
Absolutely. That's what gets students interested, and it's what inspires people to really do the research, to get good information, to defend their position. And I think it's important that a professor not try and use the power of the pen, the power of grading to force people to accept one position or another. But controversial issues are great. They get people going. And there's not many places in our society where people really have the freedom to delve into controversial issues without taking a lot of risks. And once you get out into the job world, your job might be on the line for what you say.
Yeah.
But in a university, hopefully it's a fairly protected atmosphere, so you can explore with what you think and coming up with what you believe.
Being a history professor, I heard you say you do a lot of writing. Do you require your students to do a lot of writing? Do you assign them a lot of writing projects?
I try to. In the big survey courses, there's just too many students. I would choke if I had to grade that many papers. But in the smaller courses, yeah, I do want a lot of writing, because the only way to demonstrate that you actually know something is if you can write it, if you can express it. If you can't say it, you don't know it. So writing is the way you arrive at a historical conclusion, writing or in speech.
Speaking of writing, are there any dissertations or projects you are planning on doing as a doctor of history? I know a lot of professors here are involved in outside activities, so what are yours?
Well, I'm glad you brought this up, because I have a book coming out.
Okay.
No, I have a book contract with Oxford University Press.
Okay.
It's
Nice.
the rewrite of my dissertation. It's
Okay.
called Name, Rank, and Serial Number, Korean War POWs and the Politics of Limited War. And it's about the way that Korean War POWs were used politically, both while they were in the prison camps up in North Korea during the Korean War, and also once they got home, they became kind of a political football. So I'm, as best I can, I'm finding time to rewrite that,
Okay.
and I hope to finish that. That's got to be done by the end of next summer.
Speaking of time, we as students don't realize how much time it takes for professors to get ready for a lecture. And how do you go about that process of getting ready for a lecture, getting ready to teach a class?
Well, for one of my lecture courses, oftentimes it's on a subject that I've given a lecture on before. So the first step is to pull out the old lecture, and I look through it and can't use that. But I use it as kind of a base to rework the lecture. Do some reading. I make a lot of use of history textbooks other than the one that I've assigned the students. The students read out of one, and I prepare a lecture out of another. And that's a convenient way to put a lecture together in a hurry. I'll go through and underline things that I want to come back to, and I tell all my students, underline, scribble in the margins. Don't worry about selling it back. It's underlining things. That's how you organize your material so you can come back to it and use it. So looking through those textbooks, rereading articles, reading books and trying to pull things out of them. It's hard to really dig into a book in preparation for a lecture because you're always under a time deadline, you need to get ready. So you really have to fall back a lot on what you already know. So a lot of the preparation has been done in the dozen previous years of studies.
Dr. Young, as you were talking about, you have Vietnam War class, and of course you're one of your students. Speaking of that class, what have you learned from the Vietnam War that you have taken and that you want to tell your students about, book or otherwise?
Well, there's things that are new to me and that I've learned from studying the Vietnam War, and there's the things that I think are most important for the students to come away from my class. And I think to understand the American side of the Vietnam War, you really have to understand the Vietnamese. And I've assigned you a memoir of a Viet Cong fighter. And to understand that war, you really have to know Vietnam. And the complexity of it, how much the tradition and the history of the people affected the course of the war. And the complexity of it, that's a big thing. Historians are always big on complexity. Appreciate the complexity of it. One thing that I've been particularly interested in learning about the Vietnam War is appreciating the way American attitudes, American ideology affected the decision to go into war. Critics of the Vietnam War, and I'll be honest about the fact that I'm a critic of the war. I don't want to ram it down the throats of my students, but that's who I am. But critics of the war tended to emphasize how evil President Johnson was for starting the bombing and sending the troops, how evil Nixon was for continuing the war. And there's something to that, but what has really struck me is the importance of American idealism in explaining that war, and the certainty that Lyndon Johnson had that what he was doing was right, not just for America, but for Vietnam as well. And the result was catastrophic. I mean, it destroyed much of the countryside, but to explain how people would make mistakes like that, how they could go to war in Vietnam even when they weren't even sure it would work, even when they weren't even certain they needed to. You explain that by looking at their idealism and the thought that it'll come out well in the end because Americans are doing it.
Okay, being a war researcher or a history professor, how do you feel about your research in other past wars and the war in Iraq now?
Well, one comparison that immediately leaps to mind is that leaders way up in Washington, up in the White House, they have so many things that concern them, so many things to think about. It's hard for people to have detailed knowledge about anything. And something like a war in a far-off country is an endlessly complicated affair with so much history behind it. So I think a good argument could be made that the Bush's decision to go into this second Iraq war and the decision to go into some of the other wars like Vietnam, in both cases the leaders really knew very little about the countries that they were going to war in.
Speaking of not knowing too much about countries, we have a large international student population here on campus. With that question, my question is to you: how important it is to learn about different cultures, different people in history?
Well, it's very important. It just opens your world up. I mean, you come into this campus as a freshman coming out of a small town and you think you've hit the big city. Well, wait till you travel overseas and you'll be stunned how different people's ideas are, and it broadens your ideas so much to go to other places and learn to appreciate other things. And you'll be just so much more worldly and effective person if you go all over the world. And even if you come back here, you know, I've come back to a small town after traipsing around the world, but even when you come back, you'll really have appreciated that experience.
Okay. You said back to a small town, so you're used to being in a small town. What have you found since you've been in Magnolia to, you know, help you adjust to this well, similar and familiar place? But
what's helped me adjust? Oh, the little things. My kid loved watching the bed race go past us. I never knew what an attic fan was until I moved here, and I love them. All houses should have an attic wind making a constant breeze through your house. I like the pace. I like the fact that I don't have to fight through traffic just to go to a restaurant, something like that. And people are much more interested in meeting you and getting to know you. It's easier to meet people in a small town than in the big city.
how long have you been here exactly in Magnolia?
Well, since August 3rd, so that's what, about 8 weeks, 7 weeks, something like that.
Are there any, you talked about the survey class you're doing. Tell us a little bit more, can you tell us a little bit more about the survey, or you're planning a survey on campus anytime soon?
Well, survey course meaning, you know, an introductory course to American history, and I try to make it interesting. In preparation, you were before we went on camera, you said, you know, should history be dull or interesting? I say it should be interesting.
Okay.
I like to give students a sense of how much was going on in history and how different opinions were both among the historical actors then and the way historians change their views about them.
Okay. Is this the first time that the Vietnam class has been offered here at SAU?
To the best of my knowledge, it is the first time there's been a Vietnam course. It's not a permanent section of the catalog. It's an advanced topics in history, and this semester's topic is Vietnam. Whether it will become permanent or not, I don't know. But there's been a lot of interest in it, and I'll probably teach it again sometime, either as an advanced topic or maybe make it a formal part of the catalog. So, and I want to get some of the local vets to come into the class.
Okay.
I've got leads on a few of them. If somebody is watching the show right now and knows of a vet who might want to talk to one of my classes, call me, 235-4935, 4936. No, call Kyle. He knows his number. He's not new to the area.
Okay.
And speaking of that, sir, I'm a history major, and history I love history. It's a wonderful subject, but unfortunately, the students I talk to, they're, oh, history's so dull, I don't like it. How can it become more interesting for others to enjoy? How do you think you would make it more interesting?
Well, one problem is that students come into the class expecting it to be boring.
Mm-hmm.
It has a lot to do with the way the course is taught in grade school and high school, and it tends to be memorization of dates, memorization of names. It's very dry. It's the controversy that makes history interesting, and it's arguing about history that will really stimulate students to try hard, to get information, to defend their point of view. So the more controversy, the better in history. That's what brings out students' best performance. I know that in public schools, grade schools, teachers tend to be a little bit more fearful of controversy, tend to be afraid of people from the community complaining about what they're doing in their class. That's unfortunate, but one of the nice things about a university is there is more insulation. There's more emphasis on academic freedom, and it's easier to bring controversy into a class. But at the same time, I think it's really important for instructors not to be pushing their views on a student. But at the same time, professors have opinions, and they affect the way we grade, the way we lecture. And so when students ask me a straight-up question about what I think, I may hem and haw a little bit, but eventually I want to give you a straight answer.
Okay, what advice would you give students pursuing a history career, getting a degree in history or wanting to become a professor of history at a university?
If you want to teach at the college level, if you're starting out at ASU, you're going to need to use your SAU experience to catapult you into a good school that is going to have some name recognition, because the history at the college level is one of the most glutted fields, and there will be 70, 80, 150 applications for one position, and so they need some way of sifting through them and getting to, the 40 that they'll read carefully. A lot of it is by the name of the school, and that's kind of crude and superficial, but that's the reality of it. So you'll need to get pretty good grades, and you'll need to score well on the GRE. That's the Graduate Record Exam. So do well in your classes and take some time off. Don't go right from undergraduate into graduate school. If you develop some more maturity, you'll be a better student, more serious about it, and if that's not going to be counted against you, graduate schools understand that their older students do better. And I came into the game considerably older than most graduate students. And then do lots of reading. If you like to read a lot, if you do it for pleasure, and you like arguing about things, discussing things, why, then go for it.
I understand that being like you said, you're a history. You're involved in media, in the media part as a journalist, as a reporter. So how do you think the media plays an integral part in historical events or things going on right now?
A very big role, and it's become even more important over the last 40, 50 years or so, because the media is involved not just in reporting history. You know, the journal is, the news reports are the first draft is history. So they're not just writing the history of what happened yesterday, but what they report affects people's attitudes, and their attitudes are what make the next history. So a lot of people complain about journalism or the media making history instead of reporting it. But in a way, that's just kind of the role of the media. That's what they do. They provide information, and based on what people think and believe and think they know, they're going to make later decisions. So the media plays a very big role in history, and that's just part of the game.
Does media exaggerate history, though?
Yes, it does, but the mere act of writing a story exaggerates history because you know, you look at the immensity of what happened yesterday. Take everything you did all day yesterday, multiply it by everybody in the country, and that's the history of the United States yesterday. That's an immense volume of material. So in order to have anything intelligible to say, you have to single out certain things, and those certain things become history, and everything else is forgotten. I think I get maybe what you're asking is, history, does the media sometimes exaggerate things irresponsibly? Yes, all the time, and they also ignore things that are really important.
What brought you to history? What drew you to history? You know, going back, you said you took years off, and then you went to get a master's. What brought you back into history?
I guess I decided that I wanted to go into academia. I wanted to teach. And then it was a matter of deciding which thing I was going to teach. And history, even though I hadn't taken very many history courses as an undergraduate or majored in it, that was just, it became apparent that that was my thing. And so that's what I decided to get a graduate degree in. And I really like being able to go back and dig into the issues and get some back and forth about, you know, what happened, why, what's it mean to us now.
There are many of us who have our favorite historical idols. Mine, I have Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Gandhi. Who are yours?
Well, the two names that first come to mind are Jerry Adams of Northern Ireland and Nelson Mandela of South Africa. I think those are both extraordinarily effective politicians who have moved their constituencies kicking and screaming away from violence, but yet towards effective involvement in government. And whatever you think of, I mean, Jerry Adams of Ireland, I mean, he's associated with Sinn Féin, which is, you know, the political half of the IRA, the Irish Republican Army. And whatever you think about, you know, the IRA's bombing campaigns and all the innocent people that were killed, Adams has been rather effective in moving that group away from violence. So whether, you know, they were engaged in an awful bombing campaign to begin with, but you got to respect him for moving them away from that. And Nelson Mandela able to avoid a major war. I mean, there was fighting and killing, but able to avoid a major war and still move towards democracy and away from apartheid. That's an extraordinary accomplishment, and people with much easier situations have fallen into much worse wars.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we thank you for being with us today, Dr. Young.
I'm Kyle Holleman.
I'm April Malone.
Thank you for joining us.